50 years, two men, one friendship that never broke. In a world built on betrayal, they proved loyalty was possible. Lower East Side, Manhattan, 1916. A Jewish kid named Meyer Lansky was getting beaten up by Italian street toughs. He was 14 years old, small for his age, an immigrant from Poland who'd arrived in America with nothing. The neighborhood was divided along ethnic lines, Irish territories, Italian blocks, Jewish streets, and crossing those invisible borders meant violence. Meyer had crossed one, and now he was paying for it with his fists, outnumbered and losing badly. Then a young Italian gangster named Salvatore Lucania stepped in, not to join the beating, to stop it. He told the Italian kids to back off. They knew him, respected him, feared him enough to listen. The fight ended. Meyer stood up, bloodied, but standing, and Salvatore extended his hand, helping him to his feet. "You got guts, kid," Salvatore said. "What's your name?" "Meyer Lansky." "I'm Charlie Luciano." That handshake began a partnership that would last 50 years, build a criminal empire worth billions, and prove that in a world defined by violence and betrayal, genuine loyalty was still possible. They would become the two most influential figures in American organized crime. And they would never betray each other, not once, not ever. But the real story was never only about the empire they built. To understand why their friendship mattered, you have to understand what it defied. In 1916, ethnic divisions weren't just social preferences, they were survival boundaries. Italian gangs didn't trust Jewish criminals. Jewish operations didn't partner with Irish bootleggers. The old world hatreds that drove people from Europe to America didn't disappear when they arrived in New York. They intensified, concentrated in the pressure cooker of immigrant neighborhoods where everyone was fighting for the same limited opportunities. Salvatore Lucania, who would later rename himself Charles Lucky Luciano, was already making a name in the Italian underworld. He was 19 years old, charismatic, smart, and ruthless enough to earn respect from older gangsters. But he saw something the old guard didn't. The future belonged to those who could cooperate across ethnic lines. The money in bootlegging and gambling didn't care about your last name or where your grandparents were born. Why should the gangsters care? Meyer Lansky was still a kid, but he was brilliant. His mind worked like a calculator, seeing patterns and opportunities others missed. He understood finance, organization, efficiency. Where Luciano had charisma and street authority, Lansky had genius-level strategic thinking. They complemented each other perfectly, and from that first meeting in 1916, they recognized it. What happened next changed the meaning of everything that came before. The partnership started small. Salvatore introduced Meyer to his other friends, Benjamin Siegel, who everyone would later call Bugsy, though never to his face, Frank Costello, other young gangsters who were hungry, ambitious, and smart enough to see that the old ways of doing things were holding everyone back. Together, they started running small operations, dice games, protection rackets, anything that made money. But then came Prohibition. January 1920. The 18th Amendment made producing, selling, or transporting alcohol illegal across the United States, and overnight it created the greatest criminal opportunity in American history. The entire country wanted to drink, and drinking was against the law. Someone had to supply that demand, and the young gangsters who were smart enough to organize, brave enough to take risks, and connected enough to move product would become millionaires. Luciano and Lansky saw the opportunity immediately. They started bootlegging. Not small-time selling bottles out of cars, industrial-scale operations. They worked with Arnold Rothstein, the genius criminal financier who taught them how to think big. They built supply chains from Canada and Europe. They established distribution networks throughout New York. They corrupted police and politicians to protect their operations. And they made money faster than they could count it. But what made them different from every other bootlegging gang was their partnership model. Luciano had the personality that could unite different criminal factions. Lansky had the organizational mind that could make those partnerships profitable. Together, they convinced Italian gangsters to work with Jewish criminals, Irish bootleggers to coordinate with Italian families, everyone to recognize that cooperation made everyone richer than competition. The confidence in their presence did not mean certainty existed within them. Imagine being in their position in the 1920s. You're getting rich beyond anything your immigrant parents could have imagined. You're violating every tradition about ethnic loyalty. The old guard gangsters think you're betraying your heritage by working with outsiders. And every day you're Trusting someone from a different ethnic group with your life, your money, your freedom. One betrayal could destroy everything, but they never betrayed each other. Through hundreds of deals, millions of dollars, countless opportunities to cut the other out or sell them to prosecutors, Luciano and Lansky maintained absolute loyalty. When Luciano was nearly killed in 1929, stabbed 50 times and left on a Staten Island beach, Lansky was one of the first people he reached out to from the hospital. When Lansky needed muscle to protect a shipment or political connections to fix a problem, Luciano provided it without hesitation. They weren't just business partners, they were friends. They ate together, celebrated together, trusted each other with secrets that could have gotten them both killed. And in a world where gangsters regularly murdered their closest associates over money or perceived disrespect, that friendship was revolutionary. But there was something no one around them could fully understand. Their partnership was based on complementary skills. Luciano was the public face, the charismatic leader who could walk into a room of violent men and make them listen. Lansky was the quiet genius in the background, the financial strategist who turned criminal chaos into profitable enterprise. Luciano got the headlines and the legend. Lansky got the results and the respect of those who understood how power really worked. In 1929, when Luciano called the Atlantic City Conference, the first national gathering of major gangsters, Lansky was there as co-architect. The idea of bringing together Italian, Jewish, and Irish criminals to negotiate territories and reduce violence was as much Lansky's vision as Luciano's, and it worked because they presented a united front, proving that cross-ethnic cooperation was possible. When Luciano created the commission in 1931, establishing a governing body for organized crime, Lansky wasn't given an official seat. The commission was structured around Italian families and Lansky was Jewish. But everyone knew he was Luciano's closest advisor, the strategic mind behind many of the decisions. They called him the mob's accountant, but that title undersold his influence. He was the financial brain that made the entire criminal enterprise sustainable. He built a world that looked controlled, even while carrying burdens no one could see. The true test of their friendship came in 1936 when Luciano was convicted on prostitution charges and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. It was a devastating blow, not just to Luciano, but to the entire organization he'd built. Many gangsters saw it as an opportunity. Luciano was gone, his power was up for grabs, and anyone ambitious enough could try to take it. Lansky could have done that. He had the intelligence, the financial connections, the strategic understanding. He could have consolidated power while Luciano rotted in prison, effectively replacing his friend at the top of the criminal hierarchy. That's what most people expected. That's what usually happened when a major boss went to prison. But Lansky didn't betray him. Instead, he became Luciano's eyes and ears on the outside. He visited regularly, bringing news and maintaining connections. He helped ensure that Luciano's interests were protected, that his share of the profits continued, that his position in the commission remained respected even from behind bars. Lansky was making more money than ever. His gambling operations in Florida and Cuba were incredibly profitable, but he never tried to use Luciano's absence to eliminate his friend's influence. That loyalty mattered. It kept Luciano relevant during his prison years. It maintained stability in the organization. And it demonstrated something rare in organized crime. Genuine friendship could survive even when all practical incentives pointed toward betrayal. What people called legendary often began as something deeply personal. During World War II, when naval intelligence approached Luciano about helping protect the New York waterfront, Lansky was part of the coordination. He helped facilitate the meetings, manage the logistics, ensured that Luciano's cooperation with the government actually produced results. It was a delicate situation working with the government that had imprisoned Luciano, but Lansky navigated it perfectly, protecting his friend's interests while delivering what the Navy needed. And when Luciano was deported to Italy in 1946 as the price for his wartime cooperation, Lansky immediately began working on getting him closer to America. That's how the Cuba operation happened. Lansky had been developing casino and hotel interests in Havana for years. When Luciano was exiled, Lansky saw an opportunity. Bring him to Cuba, 90 miles from Florida, close enough to maintain influence over American operations. Lansky set everything up. He negotiated with the Cuban government. He arranged Luciano's travel. He hosted him in Havana. and when they organized the Havana Conference in December 1946, the biggest mob meeting since Atlantic City, Lansky and Luciano were co-hosts, partners to the end, proving that their friendship transcended geography and legal status. When the FBI discovered Luciano in Cuba and pressured the Cuban government to deport him back to Italy, it must have been devastating for both men. They'd found a way to work together despite the exile, and now even that was being taken away. Luciano returned to Italy in 1947 and would never see the Western Hemisphere again. But the friendship didn't end. They maintained contact through letters, through intermediaries, through the business relationships that continued to connect them across an ocean. The image was real, so was the silence afterward. Luciano died in 1962 at Naples Airport, collapsing from a heart attack while meeting with a Hollywood producer. He was 64 years old, still in exile, still connected to the American underworld, but forever separated from it. Physically, when news of his death reached America, Lansky reportedly said very little publicly. But those close to him noted that he seemed genuinely affected, losing the friend he'd known for 46 years. Lansky himself lived another 21 years, dying in 1983 at age 80. In all that time, through countless investigations, prosecutions, and opportunities to trade information for leniency, Lansky never cooperated with authorities about Luciano or their partnership. He never wrote a tell-all memoir. He never betrayed the secrets they'd shared. Even in death, the loyalty held. That's remarkable, because most gangster partnerships end in betrayal or violence. The history of organized crime is filled with stories of friends who murdered each other over money, power, or perceived disrespect. Luciano himself had to orchestrate the deaths of mentors and former allies to create the commission. Betrayal was the norm, not the exception. But with Lansky, it never happened. For 50 years, through poverty and wealth, through freedom and imprisonment, through proximity and exile, their friendship survived. They never competed for supremacy. They never let ego destroy cooperation. They never chose personal advantage over partnership loyalty. Many knew the legend, the Italian and the Jewish kid who built an empire. The charisma and the brains, Lucky and Meyer, but very few understood the hunger that built it. The immigrant kids who refused to accept that ethnic divisions should limit opportunity. The young gangsters who recognized that trust could be more valuable than betrayal. The lifelong friends who proved that loyalty was possible even in the most corrupt, violent world. Imaginable, that hunger came from somewhere much deeper, from watching the old world hatreds destroy the new world opportunities, from understanding that the most powerful partnerships are built on complementary strengths, not competitive egos, from recognizing that in a world where everyone expects betrayal, unwavering loyalty becomes the ultimate strategic advantage. The real story was never only about the criminal empire Luciano and Lansky built. It was about what that empire represented. The possibility of cooperation across divisions that seemed insurmountable, the power of genuine friendship in a friendship-destroying business, the proof that loyalty, maintained over decades through every possible test, could be more valuable than any amount of money. Their partnership changed organized crime structurally. The Commission, the Atlantic City model, the cross-ethnic cooperation that became standard in American organized crime, all of it came from what Luciano and Lansky demonstrated was possible. But more importantly, their friendship changed it philosophically. They proved that gangsters didn't have to be mindless killers operating on pure instinct and ego. They could be strategic thinkers who understood that lasting power comes from trust, cooperation, and loyalty. The confidence in their presence did not mean certainty existed within them. When you study their partnership, what's striking is how balanced it was. Luciano never diminished Lansky's contributions. Lansky never resented Luciano's prominence. They seemed comfortable with their roles, understanding that together they were more powerful than either could be alone. That's rare. Most partnerships develop tension over credit or control. Egos clash, resentments build. But Luciano and Lansky avoided all of that for 50 years. Part of it was complementary skills. Each recognized the other's strengths and never felt threatened. Instead, they leveraged those differences to build something neither could have created alone. But skills don't sustain 50 years of loyalty. What made it work was genuine affection and respect. They liked each other. They trusted each other's judgment and character. And that foundation proved strong enough to survive every test. When Luciano was in prison, he could have blamed Lansky for not protecting him better from prosecution. When Lansky was making millions in Cuba while Luciano was exiled in Italy, Luciano could have resented his friend's freedom and success. When either of them was under investigation and facing potential prison time, they could have traded information about the other for leniency, but none of that ever happened. The friendship held, and that might be the most important lesson of their partnership. In a business built on betrayal, where violence and double crosses were standard operating procedure, where loyalty was constantly tested and usually found wanting, two men proved that a different way was possible. Not through naivety or weakness, but through strategic understanding that loyalty, maintained over decades, was the most valuable commodity in organized crime. Their empire was worth billions, their friendship was priceless, and in the end the friendship mattered more than the money, because the money could be seized, lost, or spent. But the loyalty, the 50 years of unwavering partnership through every possible circumstance, that became legendary. That inspired others, that demonstrated what was possible when two people genuinely committed to each other's success. Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky proved that even in the darkest, most corrupt corners of American society, genuine human connection could survive. That friendship could transcend ethnic hatred, business competition, and criminal chaos. That two immigrant kids from different worlds could build something together that lasted longer and meant more than any criminal empire. They never betrayed each other, not once, not ever, and in doing so they achieved something far more remarkable than wealth or power. They achieved what almost no one in their world could claim, a friendship that lasted a lifetime and died only when death took one of them from the other. That's the real legacy of Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, not the money they made or the criminal structures they built, but the proof that loyalty was possible. That friendship could survive even in the most friendship-destroying environment imaginable. That two people genuinely committed to each other could weather every storm and emerge with their bond intact. 50 years, two men, one friendship, zero betrayals. In a world built on broken promises and blood, they proved that something better was possible. And that might be the most revolutionary thing they ever accomplished.